If you grew up in the 1970s, let me ask you something. Do you ever feel like you're living in a world that moves 3 times faster than your mind actually wants to go? And yet somehow you still manage to keep up? Maybe part of you wonders, how am I even doing this? You look around at smartphones, endless notifications, streaming everything, and think, we survived with 3 TV channels and aluminum foil antennas. This can't be that hard. Because if you were a child of the 70s, you've quietly been carrying around some rare traits that today's world doesn't always recognize, but desperately needs. Think back for a second. No need to get nostalgic in a cheesy way, just remember. Maybe it was riding your bike until the streetlights flickered on. Maybe it was waiting all week for that one show that came on Saturday night, and if you missed it, well, you just missed it. No reruns on demand? No, just rewind. You had to live with it. You had to wait. You had to accept. And that right there, hiding in plain sight, is one of those traits. You learned patience in a world that has almost forgotten what that even feels like. Today, if a video buffers for more than 3 seconds, people are ready to declare the Wi-Fi unusable. But you grew up rewinding cassette tapes with a pencil, hoping the ribbon wouldn't snap. You learned that some things took time. Film had to be developed. Mail had to be delivered. Songs had to be recorded off the radio at the exact right moment. This wasn't just inconvenience. It was training. Psychologists call it delayed gratification, and studies show kids who learned to wait often grew into adults with better self-control, better planning skills, and more resilience. You didn't need a study. Life itself was your practice drill. And if you grew up then, you know something else too, boredom. Real, honest-to-goodness, stare-at-the-ceiling boredom. No scrolling, no instant distraction. It's just you, your thoughts, and whatever you could invent. At the time, it probably felt torturous. Now we know something interesting. Boredom actually boosts creativity. When your brain has nothing prepackaged to consume, it starts making its own entertainment. Those forts you built out of blankets, the stories you made up, the weird games created with nothing but a stick and imagination that was your creativity muscle doing push-ups. Fast forward to now, and you might not always feel creative in the artsy sense. But that same mental flexibility is why you can look at a broken drawer, a chaotic schedule, or a family crisis, and think, all right, let's figure this out. You grew up solving problems without Googling. You had to ask around, experiment, fail, try again. That's rare now, and deeply valuable. Here's another thing you probably don't give yourself credit for. You are unusually good at living in 2 worlds. You learned to navigate the analog one first, and then you had to learn the digital one as an adult. People talk about digital natives like that's the ultimate advantage. But there's a hidden power in being what researchers sometimes call a digital bridge. You remember how things worked when privacy meant your diary had a tiny lock on it, not a 16-page terms of service agreement. You know what connection felt like before Wi-Fi? That means your sense of what's normal is anchored in something deeper than the latest app design. You know, a conversation that lasts for hours face-to-face is different than a comment thread. Your nervous system was wired in an era where silence was common and not automatically filled with noise. If you feel like you crave quiet in a loud world, that's not you being out of touch. That's you remembering a very human rhythm that a lot of people today are burning out without ever experiencing. And speaking of rhythm, the 70s were a weird, beautiful mix of chaos and possibility. Social changes, political tension, economic uncertainty, new music, new movements, new ideas about identity and freedom. If you were growing up inside all that, your nervous system learned to read a room fast. Probably developed a kind of emotional radar. You watched the adults, how they coped, how they argued, how they made up, how they numbed out, how they carried on. Psychologists would call this heightened awareness social attunement. In regular language, it means you often know when something is off before anyone says a word. It can feel like a burden sometimes, especially if you were the kid who tried to keep the peace, who noticed when someone was upset, who tried to make everyone okay. But that sensitivity, that ability to feel the undercurrent, is also a rare strength. In a world that rewards loud opinions and hot takes, you can sense the quiet things. Who needs a check-in? Who's pretending they're fine? Who's on the edge? You might also notice something else about yourself. You can adapt. The world has changed around you at a pace no previous generation had to face in adulthood. Technology, work culture, family roles, even what success looks like every decade. The script kept rewriting itself. and here you are. Maybe a little tired at times, maybe occasionally muttering back in my day under your breath, but still learning, still adjusting, still moving forward. There's a term in psychology called cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift perspectives, to adjust to new rules, to rethink how you do things. You didn't just read about that, you lived it. You went from rotary phones to touchscreens, from paper maps to GPS, from records to streams. People joke that your generation learned patience from waiting for the TV to warm up, but you also learned something more profound: how to change without losing yourself. Let's be honest though, not all of this felt like a gift at the time. If you grew up in the 70s, there's a good chance you were taught some silent rules. Don't talk too much about feelings. Just get on with it. Be tough. Be grateful. Emotional vocabulary wasn't exactly primetime TV, so you might have spent years carrying unspoken worries, pushing through pain, surviving instead of processing. That can leave scars. It can also leave a kind of quiet strength that doesn't always look like strength from the outside. Here's the reframe. You learned to function under pressure, to keep going when you didn't have a language for what you were feeling. And if you've since started unlearning some of that, if you've allowed yourself to actually feel, to name things, to soften, instead of just harden, that combination is incredibly powerful. You have resilience without numbness, responsibility without complete self-erasure. That's rare. Think, too, about money and security. Many 70s kids watched their parents ride economic ups and downs with no financial safety net like people talk about now. You learned to stretch what you had, to fix things instead of replacing them, to recognize that new wasn't always better. Sometimes it was just newer. That practicality, that ability to tell the difference between what you want and what you actually need, is gold in a culture that constantly tells people they're only one purchase away from happiness. If younger people around you sometimes seem anxious, restless, always chasing the next upgrade, your groundedness is not a flaw. It's a counterweight. It's a memory in your bones that life can feel rich even when your stuff is simple. And here's something else you might not have noticed about yourself. You can often hold contradictions without completely falling apart. You remember a time when things felt simpler, but you also know that simpler didn't always mean better or fairer. You've watched society wrestle with injustice, identity, and power over the decades, and you've had to rethink things you once assumed were fixed. That takes humility, it takes courage, it takes a willingness to look at your own story and say, I didn't know then what I know now, and that's okay, I can grow. In a world that encourages instant outrage and quick judgment, your long view is rare. You've seen how trends rise and fall, how certainty ages, how today's obvious was yesterday's unthinkable. So you're less easily shocked, less easily manipulated by panic. You might not think of that as a superpower, but imagine if more people had it. If sometimes you feel out of place, like everyone else got a manual on how to live in this hyper-digital, always-on world, and you somehow missed the memo. Let me turn that feeling around for a moment. You didn't miss the memo. You just remember a different one. One that said, go outside, talk to your neighbors, wait your turn, try again, accept imperfection. Use what you have. Keep your word. Is every part of that old operating system perfect? Of course not. But built into it are qualities that modern life quietly erodes: patience, resourcefulness, attentiveness, and the ability to sit with your own thoughts without immediately escaping them. If you grew up in the 1970s, those traits are not just nostalgia, they're tools. Tools for staying sane in a world that constantly pulls at your attention. Tools for helping the people around you feel seen, not just liked. Tools for remembering that progress should improve our humanity, not replace it. So maybe the next time you catch yourself thinking, I'm too old for this, pause for a second. Notice how much you've already adapted. Notice how often people come to you for advice, for clarity, for perspective, even if they don't say it out loud. Notice that you have lived through vinyl and streaming, handwritten letters and instant messages, 3 channels and infinite options, and somehow your core self is still there, watching, learning, adjusting. That's not just age, that's wisdom plus flexibility. It's rare. As you listen to this, maybe a few memories are floating up: songs, smells, moments, scenes from your own 70s childhood. Let them. They're reminders that you've already survived a lot of change, and you didn't come out empty-handed. You came out with a mind that knows how to wait, how to improvise, how to read people, how to live with less, and still feel like you have enough. If this resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone else who grew up in that era, or even someone younger who's never really heard what it was like. And if you feel like adding your own story, the thing you think growing up in the 70s gave you that today's world doesn't quite understand, drop it in the comments. Your experiences aren't just back in my day stories, they're maps. And a lot of people out there are still learning how to navigate a world you've already crossed more than once.